Thank you for joining us. I'm Don Ford. This is Progressive Insider. We are heating up in the convention process as we move forward through the primaries towards Super Tuesday. If you're seeing this after Super Tuesday, keep in mind everything we're going to talk about is still super relevant. But I am here today with Jason Eno, Bernie Sanders delegate from Hawaii, as well as the original creator of the Dem Enter Facebook group that became a bit of a phenomenon that a lot of people had their hands in. So Jason, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Don. It's been a long time coming.
It has been a long time coming. Hopefully you won't be too honest. So I'm here in Los Angeles and you are in Hawaii, and you gave us a shot earlier of exactly where you are. I'm just here staring at myself, so I can't decide if I like my view or your view better, but I know you got a pretty good one, so well done, sir.
Yeah.
So let's talk about you for a second, Jason. You talk a lot about entryism, because that is, after all, the idea behind Dem Enter as a concept. It's not a new idea. It's just was like a response to the exit from the party that we saw. And we'll get into that later on. But I think that for us today, where things get really, really relevant, is this convention process that's happening. How these delegates, what are delegates, Jason? Tell me what a delegate is.
Okay. A delegate can be a lot of things, frankly. It can be a county delegate. It can be a state delegate. It can be a national delegate. A delegate is really a person who goes to, at its core, is a person who goes to represent others at a convention of some sort. That's kind of the base of what a delegate is.
So what you're saying is that it's the lowest level of elected official, and the position is somewhat temporary.
Yes, it's. I would say that it's not necessarily the lowest level, but it is a temporary position, and really, it would seem that delegates are only used when important decisions are being made, or a collection of important decisions.
Do you have any examples of important decisions that delegates might make?
Oh, sure. The platform for a state party, state delegate going to a state convention will often vote on all of the different platform positions. The rules. I also happen to be on the state rules committee here for the Democratic Party of Hawaii. During the convention, essentially the rules for everything are all up in the air, and anybody can change anything.
Is this what you think that people say? People say that the Democratic Party isn't really aligned to its rules and they can do whatever they want. And I think that what you just pointed out is the very true side of that, right? The rules are up to shift at any point based on the committees and how they come together. And people like you, who were Bernie Sanders delegates, have gotten into the position of being on these rules committees where these actual things can be changed.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. One notable thing about all of the people who went to the national convention is that they all had to deal, to some extent or another, with the Democratic Party, and so that essentially creates a subset of people who are willing to deal with people they don't necessarily like in order to be able to be in the room and making the decisions.
So now, when you got started, you're talking about all the things that you've done and the position you were in the rules committee, and we haven't even gotten into what change or you may have shifted, but this all started with being a Bernie Sanders delegate, because did you hold any positions before that?
No, not at all. I was essentially apolitical prior to December of 2015.
Do you remember what it was that lit the fire, that really got the, I need to get involved?
Absolutely. I say I was apolitical. That doesn't mean that I didn't have opinions on what should happen. I've always been an environmentalist, for instance, but I never translated those opinions into any particular kind of action. So the thing that got a hook in me from Bernie Sanders was when I saw him speak, and it actually happened on Facebook is where I first found out about him. When I saw him speak, I could see that he knew, not like believed, not some philosophical idea. He knew that if enough people did the right things, we could change things for the better. And it's hard to pick. That might be too nuanced for people to pick up on, but it's the difference between looking at somebody and knowing that they actually believe 100% what they are saying versus someone who is telling you something to make you do something.
So what you're saying is there was a confidence in how he delivered his message, that he wasn't trying to tell you what you wanted to hear. He was telling you what you knew people needed to hear.
What he knew people needed to do to get the results.
Wow. We could have really fumbled on that one. Well done, sir. That was, yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. It's a tricky concept. So it got you going. It gets you into this process. Delegates, what are these? You don't even know. It's December 2015. I remember where the community was at that time. And so what got you into the convention fight? You see, we talk now about New Hampshire. Let's talk about New Hampshire for a second, actually. We'll get into that in a second, because we'll drag this all back around to the thing. So we have New Hampshire and Iowa, right? You did the battle last time. That's what you got drawn into that, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And you did that in 2000. So you were just involved in December 2015. So that means you did that fight in 2016.
I did. I feel like to some degree I came in later in the process in the internal Democratic Party stuff, because like I said, I was essentially apolitical. I mean, I had an idea of what Democrats and Republicans were, and that was about the most, I didn't really know anything. So it took me a little while to kind of come up to speed with the ideas that were being presented. And then I started to engage in more of the process side, which is really, I think, where where most of my energy has gone, is understanding the process, trying to explain not only the process, but the possibilities to other people.
We're seeing a big shakeup in Iowa now, just like this with the state party. And speaking about rules, it appears that some rules may not have gone as they should have. Some rules went the way they're in the rules, but should they have gone that way in general? We don't see that until we see the rules actually in action. Now, you're someone who pulls through these rules and looks for numbers and looks for details. And Jason sends me his stuff on the regular, and I always look at it like, oh, I need to get out a calculator, like I don't know, do I need I need some kind of tool I don't own for this kind of math. So what's your take on Iowa? The Iowa Democratic Party chair has stepped down. We'll get into the strategy behind that in a minute. But what are your thoughts just first on the Iowa results and how they've been coming out, and just, what do we do? Is there a chance to regain faith in the process?
I think faith in the process is not a good idea. There's no need to have faith in damn near anything. Just investigate it, learn about it, and then you'll know. General thoughts on Iowa is there are multiple layers of quote unquote issues, and some of those, a portion of those, are that I don't like the rules. I don't like that rural areas have a heavier weighting in the state delegate equivalents than more urban areas. I don't like that, but that is what the delegate selection plan, which governs what happens in that state as far as selecting delegates, that is what was written into those rules. And so in that sense, it's hard to complain about. Meaning you can complain about that, but you can't necessarily say that there was anything underhanded about that.
With the difference between the planning versus action, like the rule where they create more state delegates versus the rule of how they distribute delegates, are two separate issues, which I think you're making a really good point here, that even the rule that I'm complaining about, it's in the rules. So you have to change it at a different phase. or you have to challenge it at the state convention process, or you have to challenge it at the DNC, but you can't really complain about that in a re-canvass phase. And I think that is something that I just learned.
Yeah, I think if you don't know what the rules say, then you're very apt to just lob whatever at it because you don't like what happened, but you don't really know why what you don't like happened. So I think it's important for people who want to actually change the thing to know the information and be able to separate out, these are rules I don't like. Is like, I don't like the Electoral College. I'd rather have a popular vote. This is right in line with it, just something that people understand more commonly. I don't like the Electoral College. I would like to see a popular vote for a whole variety of reasons. That is a complaint about the rules themselves, the way that they have been written and implemented, or written. A separate thing is saying the election was rigged by changing the vote totals in this way, by foreign manipulation, or whatever you want to throw in there. So there's kind of the problems with the rules, and then there's the problems with the violations of the rules. And the two are handled much differently, much differently.
And this is what I think we talked about last night, is how we had discussed this, about how people approach the rules, and the rigging as a concept, both the two. And you got to look at the rigging like an actual boat rigging. Like, there are ropes that put up a sail if used right, and the rules can always be manipulated internally. And you have to know how the rigging works as it exists, where things can get manipulated. Like, for example, in New Hampshire, we are seeing some results coming out from a very specific type of electronic counter that election integrity experts had already been complaining about, giving a certain candidate a 13% advantage than the polling suggested he would. So even in these situations, people really got to understand in advance of the elections happening where these problems are going to happen, so that when they happen, you quickly know how they happen and you can explain it, so that you can actually undo, because there is a phase in all this, a time in everything we do, because all these rules are created where we can change this rule, but you got to do it when it's time to do it.
That's right. And oftentimes the timing, if you're trying to change things, is not aligned for you. You notice the problem after the point has already passed that you could do anything about it, and then you have to wait like 2 or 4 years later to be able to change that rule. But by the time 2 or 4 years comes, half the people are gone. There's 3 core people that are like, yeah, you remember this was a problem last time, right?
There's only 3 people left. That's so true.
Yeah. I mean, you had like 100 freaking people and whatever, parties happening, and then, but by the time, and this is a matter of, the establishment is the establishment because they hold the position that we want to hold, and so if they just sit there, they're good. So it's up to us to recognize the terrain that we're working in, and to be able to know what to do when to affect things later on that will affect things later on. It's just working through a chain, or you can work backwards. That's, this happened. How did that happen? Work all the way back to the beginning, and you'll probably find a delegate at a state convention, or you'll find a precinct committee person, or what have you. What one of my favorite quotes, and I feel like I'll probably get it slightly wrong now, but is actually from a Republican president whose platform is actually pretty good. Dwight Eisenhower. He said, "In all my time preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable."
Right. The idea that once the battle starts, you have to have a plan to start, and you have to have a plan for everything goes wrong. And then you have to have a plan for how you pick up the pieces in both scenarios. And then there's usually a third scenario that you're not thinking of that's actually what's going to happen.
Right. And the planning is having all of the information you possibly can at your fingertips at a moment's notice. Because I'll tell you, there's a big difference between being able to quote straight out of the rules to a person you're having a engagement with. I can't tell you how many times I've won arguments. I can think of some right now. In the state convention in 2016, you walk up to somebody and you're arguing about some issue of being able to seat these delegates for this reason or that. And when you can make your argument a quote from the rules and they haven't read them and they don't know if you're right or you're wrong.
I've said a couple times, the rules are like this, and people are like, wait, are they? And I'm like, yeah.
Right. So at that point, if you have, either if people just believe you, or if you've actually can quote them the rules because you've read the thing 100 times, you've read that passage, you've seen that little passage is a key portion of the whole process. So you've read that thing 100 times. I mean, I have notes, where I printed out 17 delegate selection plans and freaking highlighters all over them and the whole thing, because you have to track it all back through. You move through the whole process of how these people are elected, and then you see what they do, and then you're like, oh, that's what they do? Okay, wait, how are they elected again?
This might be a time that really, really calls for one of those maps with the string, where you tie it from thing to thing, from state to state, because you really can actually tie this from, okay, this guy learned it from this person, and this person did it from this, and then this person nationalized it. And you really got to know that pattern, because those are the chains by which, change is created, but it's not always good. It can be if it's directed the right way and put positive energy into it, which is just not what's happening. It's just not happening. But let's ask you the real important question, Jason. The Iowa Democratic Party chair has resigned, and we're going to get into this, what happened there, and explain that. But I have the question now. We've gotten the Iowa Democratic Party chair to resign, but what do we do about the Iowa DNC?
Well, Don, we don't do anything about the Iowa DNC because the Iowa DNC is not a thing.
What do you mean? What do you mean there's no Iowa DNC? How does this is crazy. You're freaking me out, man.
Well, last I checked, Iowa is a state in the United States of America.
I'm not sure based on these rules we're seeing coming out of there. It feels like another planet, but please continue.
So the idea of national, which is, many people might not know this, that, many people complain about the DNC and have for 4 years and still don't know what the 3 letters mean. Democratic National Committee is what the DNC is. The national points to a nationwide sort of thing. So it'd be really odd to have Iowa National. I mean, maybe if you're in Texas, they'd be into that. But anyway,
Texas would be into that.
There are state parties, okay? There are state parties. There are also territory parties, District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, as well as Democrats abroad.
It's 57, in case anyone's wondering.
That's 57. Right, 57. Those are the real party, if you will. The real party, quote unquote, is really a whole bunch of parties that are the state parties. The Democratic National Committee, that really just controls, for the most part, the nomination process, because the nomination process for a presidential nominee is that, and the race for the Democratic Party chair and executive committee are the only national functions under the Democratic flag.
The only thing he missed in there is the regional chairs. The regional chairs, they have some sub-elections inside after the DNC elections, which is like its own meeting. They have the next meeting, which will handle all those regional chair positions. And the regional chairs don't have a lot of power, but they could if they leveraged right. But a lot of people get in those positions. They're elected at this point. So they're not really there to rock the boat, as it were.
Right. Yeah, certainly. And I think that as far as regional chairs, they can have a minimal impact within their region. But if you can get a whole region together to start smacking around the rest of the country, then you're really doing something. But
yeah, that's actually a very good point, and that's something that I've actually tried to talk a couple of regional chairs into. I'm like, if you just pushed on this a little harder, they really, from my experience, they only serve as a really good communication chain to the chair himself. Like, the chair isn't going to talk to somebody like me unless he's paying me. I mean, it's a whole lot of trouble. I know, right? So when something needs to go up or down, these regional chairs sort of serve that purpose, and that's one of the things that people go, well, you can have a lot of effect on the party if you figure out who these people are that are speaking to the person you need to get the message to. Things can
that's
move
right.
very fast, actually. Now, you've experienced that. You've worked directly with the Hawaii former state party chair and one of our Bernie Sanders superdelegates, wasn't he, in 2016?
That is correct. Yeah, one of very few. Yes, I have worked with him, but let's not leave the nation of Iowa just yet.
Oh, all right then. What more do we have to tell about Iowa? Are you saying there's more to the story, sir?
there are multiple layers to the story, and I think that it's telling in our conversations, private conversations about Iowa. You and I have disagreements, and we are both quite like-minded.
Careful what you say. This is being recorded.
we are quite like-minded, and yet we can have disagreements about the interpretations of the rules and then the way that those were implemented. So it just goes to show how amorphous this all is. The two of us have been talking for 4 years about all these same subjects. I mean, we range out into the world here, but typically our conversations are Democratic Party, either general strategy or specific strategies, or the process itself and how that affects what the outcome. So some of the things that I see in Iowa, there are the things I don't like about the rules. There are things that are in the delegate selection plan that were promised to happen, did not happen, but since the election has already happened, there's really no way to have any accountability for them.
So you're talking about these layers of these problems where, everyone seems to be talking about one individual problem, and it seems like they become just one giant problem, but we can't look at it that way, right? You're starting to talk about these layers of the problem and the rules, the problem with how the rules were abused, and then we get into like the media tabulation and how the media is also hiding things. So, and that's the direction we're going with this. You're saying there are multiple problems that people need to address and address those individually.
Yeah. I think that there's very few things that you can address in a huge, broad way. In that sense, that's what the election, per se, the state party chair or the committee that controls the state party, that's where you put the people to just make the good decisions, right? But when you're trying to deal with or even point out to them the very specific things that are happening that are screwing up the process, making the process unfair. And I'm somebody that, I've worked at elections. I worked at my precinct in 2016 and 2018. I'm now the chair of my state house district. I would rather have somebody vote against my candidate and have their vote count properly than try to abuse the system in any way. I mean, that's just how it is. But point being that if you don't know specifically what's wrong, everybody knows they don't like the way that Bernie Sanders won, quote unquote, the popular vote, but got less delegates out of Iowa. Okay, this is kind of, I'm moving up to a height here to be able to just survey what most Bernie supporters know and care about. Bernie got more people to show up for him initially. He also got more people in the second alignment, which is one of the numbers that counts. So he in that sense, won the election in that he had more people show up. He ended up with less delegates. Now, that's it. That's what people generally know, and they don't know why. So they attribute it to quote unquote rigging. Now, people who will go another layer deeper will already have known that there's 4 congressional districts and there's at-large delegates and there's Clio delegates, and the way that the vote, the second alignment, translates into state delegate equivalents and blah, 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 blah. And that's the planning part. Like I mentioned, my favorite quote earlier on, that's the planning part. I already know all that in my head. And so when I see the delegate totals come out, I then immediately move to how did those delegate counts, how is that computed? And that allows you to dig another layer deeper into the process. And once you get into that layer, you can dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And eventually you start to see what the real problems are. That's either the way the delegate selection plan was written, or the way that there's no accountability for things going wrong. There's no way to get it back, so to speak. You know, you can't just be like, well.
And the problem with Iowa, to jump in here, the problem with Iowa is it has all these things going on. Like New Hampshire had a couple of issues. We have a good chair there, generally speaking. I'm sure whatever issue is probably happening at a county level, like what we're discovering there in New Hampshire with this electronic tabulating machine, it seems to be limited to a county-wide decision. Like someone purchased those on that end. But when we're talking about Iowa, it feels like this thing was just, I mean, the math has been wrong since it was created in like 75. Like the math they're using, I always said since it was a caucus, but it actually hasn't been around that long. And Jason keeps mentioning this idea of the math not being tabulated right. And this is a big issue that I've been pushing on, because when we were doing the superdelegate reform, a giant issue is the word eligibility. Like the word eligibility is a super critical part of anything that uses elections. And that is coming out in Iowa. And we'll get into a bunch of things that Jason's pointing out. But what he's saying is with these rural areas, so everyone can understand, is that there are extra delegates in these rural areas. But how does this happen? Well, how this happens is that when people decide not to realign, this only occurs when there are multiple candidates and one candidate becomes non-viable and those people choose not to realign. Because those numbers, whoever leaves the room, because they want everyone who showed up to be counted as a state delegate. So that, of course, that number is used for your initial how many delegates are in the room tabulation. But when it comes to the final division of how delegates are allocated, you can only use the final eligible number. But they're not. They're using the total number. So what this does is this is the equivalent of someone coming in to vote and 10 people deciding not to vote, and then those votes being given out to the candidates at the end of the election based on their bulk of vote at that site. So if somebody got 60% of the vote, they're getting 60% of those ballots. And that gives whoever is in the lead an artificial lead, and that puts them closer to a whole number, and it allows them to take advantage of the rounding rule that rounds up whole numbers, which I don't need to explain because the whole party uses it. If you want me to explain it, I can't. I feel like I've been talking too long. So, Jason, I know this sounds a little kooky, but I mean, it seems like we should only be using that final eligible number in all the actual allocations, so we're not improperly distributing ineligible voters.
You you may be right, you may be wrong. I think that it's a matter of, you know, this is how we end up in constitutional crisis. What did the founders intend? It's a very difficult thing to wrap your mind around because it's so pervasive. I think a lot of the things that you are suggesting about the initial number, the first alignment number, the second alignment and final alignment number, and how that is then used in the math equation to determine the number of state delegate equivalents. You could draw a parallel, I feel like, between just the general 15% threshold for getting national delegates in a congressional district, in that in New Hampshire, people voted for Andrew Yang. He didn't get 15% in the state or in either of the congressional districts. Therefore, he got no delegates. And literally,
you're saying that those votes are just not counted.
Those votes are gone.
Yeah, those votes are gone at this point, and you're throwing your votes away, and that's part of the process.
And everything after that point is only utilizing the percentages among the people who got it over 15%. So what I'm saying is that initial number of total voters is no longer used. It is only used essentially in that first step to compute the 15%.
Right. Because
what are we 15% of?
Right, because they make a new 100. It's actually in the rules for the delegate allocation. They make a new 100 from that point. You basically just throw all those things away. Well, actually, I think that makes an argument for my point that those rules those votes are getting thrown away and they're getting completely discounted. So caucus rules brings them back into play, and I feel like they shouldn't. And so I see the argument you're making, and actually, I think it accidentally agreed with me.
No, right. I think, I'm just pointing. I'm not even saying this is a good thing to do or a bad thing to do. And I'm not saying that this math equation does or doesn't work. I'm saying that there are these things that are pervasive that in a lot of ways are just not questioned.
Well, you also mean there's precedent in a legal term. There's precedent for that. Right. I think that's what you're trying to say. And that is a very that's the word when we get into party rules, by the way, that everyone really needs to get used to saying, because if there is precedent, like right now in Iowa, there's precedent to remove their delegates completely because of what happened in 2008. And they ended up getting a half vote at the end of the day. It was Michigan and Florida because the state parties mishandled their elections. So there's precedent to hit Iowa during the rules committee because of this flaw in their system. But that's before we even get to the obvious math and the coin tosses and the thing. Everyone's seen the coin toss. It was played on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan played it, and he's like, that guy's a fucking cheater. That's so. What are your thoughts on all this when we get into, like, we're doing a small recanvass? The Iowa Democratic Party chair stepped down, which again we're going to get to in just like 1 second, because you mentioned a committee that we need to explain to people what it does, because it kind of does serve as the Iowa DNC in a weird sort of way, and it's called the Central Committee. Is kind of, but for the counties, it's the county body that comes together to be the Central Committee. So anyways, but what the hell is with this math on these worksheets and the caucus sheets? Because that's the second layer, right? The second layer is, first layer is the rules have the potential to be rigged. Then you get into, okay, well, how did they actually do the math fair? Would you say the actual math by the rules was done fair across the board?
No. Nobody, like literally nobody who's arguing on any side of this is saying that the math is done correctly. It's just too damn straightforward to be like, okay, this times that equals this. Well,
did we get anything like this in 2006? 2016 wasn't this like obvious. They had some nuance to it. We didn't get anything like this. We could point at all kinds of things, except for New York, where all the people disappeared from the ballots and somebody was actually held, or from the polls. You know what I'm talking about? The woman.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyways. Right. So yeah, we didn't get anything like this in 2016.
You know, I think that it's, you know, here again is, you know, going back to your analogy of rigging, it's like somebody can just screw up and manipulate those ropes wrong and drive you into a rock, because it's not that they were trying to drive you into the rock, but they just did, because they didn't know what the hell they were doing. They were nervous, whatever. Or somebody could be like, I'm going to sink this damn ship and go up there and manipulate those ropes, because they know how to manipulate them.
Right.
And they steered the ship into the freaking rock.
Well, that's what I'm saying I think is happening. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a longtime Bernie supporter, but I feel like the people who are doing this, who are behind Pete, are the same people in 2016 that did it. They don't seem to be interested in actually winning the presidency. I mean, Pete, of course, wants to be president. Let's not kid ourselves. but it seems like the way they're creating this false pretense of support, it's the same thing they did in 2016 in that primary, and that ultimately led to losses for just a multitude of reasons. And we're just seeing the same people rigging it off the cliff again. I mean, that's what I feel like is happening. That's my personal opinion. What do you think?
I tend to be really conservative on the accusation of quote unquote rigging. Well, for one reason, I hate that word because it's too broad. But for another, to fix the problem, you don't necessarily have to point the finger at somebody and say they are manipulating the outcome.
Just the idea that the outcome is being manipulated is enough.
The chair stepped down, and I don't believe that anybody has accused him personally of manipulating things to come to a different outcome.
Well, technically, I have. So let's talk about that real fast and what we did.
Nobody that matters.
I just take credit for things I didn't do anyway.